You've called for some kind of international body, which I agree with. When I was running for president, I pitched a World Data Organization that was pitched to me by Ian Bremmer, who just had a TED Talk that I know you saw.
Yeah, We
And
we actually met at TED. I'll let you finish your story, but a quick anecdote about Ian is we met at lunch the day before I gave my TED talk, and he said, "What's your TED talk about?" And I said, "Well, imagine you're at a '60s protest and you say, 'What do you want?' or 'What do we want?' International governance for AI. When do we want it? Now." And
now,
Ian
yeah.
turns to me and says, "6 months ago."
So, an international body, I've called for something I'm not sure if you included in your Senate testimony, which is an AI dedicated regulatory body here in the U.S. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think there should both be a cabinet level agency or office and then, an agency underneath that. There's just too much going on right now to expect that all the existing agencies have it covered. They kind of wrote a memo kind of saying that in between the lines. But the reality is that the existing laws don't anticipate certain things. Like we have laws about protecting private individual speech. But what do you do if somebody makes a billion pieces of harmful misinformation a day? We don't have laws for that, just to give you one example. AI makes things possible in a wholesale way where they could only be possible retail before. It's sort of similar to like a submachine gun versus a knife. You have to think about them differently. So there are a lot of new both opportunities we want to take advantage of and a lot of risks that we need to look out for. I think we need somebody in the White House whose job is full time, think about this and nothing else, and they need a staff to keep up with all of the different parameters of it. And this is not to like cut out the existing agencies from the loop, but we're going to need some new things. So, for example, I think that we want to have something like FDA approval. If somebody's going to do research, that's one thing. But if they're going to roll out a system to 100,000 people, or sorry, 100 million people, we really want to test it, make sure it's safe in the same way we do with a drug. We don't just say, I did, trials on 10 people. Okay, let's put it out to every drugstore on the planet. We say, let's show that, this is right. And we need independent examiners to say, you've made this case, but there are weaknesses in your case. We need to understand this better. You say that there's this risk. You don't have anything about the risk. We also need an agency to push the companies to be transparent. You have Microsoft saying transparency is important to us, and then they use GPT-4, and we don't know what's inside of GPT-4. We don't know what it's trained on, which has a huge influence on things like bias. So we need someone to really hold the company's feet to the fire. So I am 100% for having an agency like that. And I've been talking to people in Washington and trying to talk up that idea as much as I can.
Yeah, so after you went to the Senate, your testimony was very warmly received. What do you see as the prospects for some of your recommendations being followed, or a coherent regulatory approach?
Yeah, I like the word coherent. That is the nub of it. On the one hand, I'm very inspired in certain ways. So the hearings that was at hearing was one of the most bipartisan things I think the Senate has done in a long time. And I think everyone I know who kind of follows Washington more closely than I do was amazed at how cooperative it was, how much people recognized the urgency, genuinely seemed to want to work together, seemed to recognize that with social media they didn't quite get things right, and want to move quicker and better. So you have that on the positive side of the ledger. On the negative side of the ledger, it sort of feels like everybody in Washington has their own ideas about what to do, and they're not necessarily all coordinated and talking to each other. And I wouldn't say there's any one clear answer that has emerged yet. And so, like, there's a lot of motion, but whether that motion turns out to be coherent, I think, is the question. There's one moment I liked in the Senate proceedings, which was a kind of recognition of their own limitations. I can't remember who was it said it, but they said, look, we're not here to legislate like the day to day. The way I were to repeat it is the Senate shouldn't be there to make rules for GPT-5 as opposed to GPT-4. The Senate should be there to create an enduring agency that can move with the flow and follow all of the details. And I think, some of them realize that. They don't want to be micromanaging the details of AI development. If they get it right, they will build some agency that is nimble enough, fast enough to be able to deal with things as they move.
Yeah, the last thing you'd want is the Senate have to check in anytime there's a new development.
They don't want that. We don't want them to do that, right? I mean, with due respect, I mean, some of the senators are really following what's going on. Like, I saw Senator Blumenthal on a call after the proceedings, and he really understands all of the issues. He's following very closely. But you can't expect 100 senators to all, have their fingers on the pulse of AI. They might, like right now, because they're going to make a first important decision. But certainly in the long term, they have so many other things to focus on, and so that they shouldn't be micromanaging.
Hey YouTube, glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you really like it, hit subscribe, and then YouTube will notify you every time we have a bang up new guest. Thank you.